I'm a criminal and a monster and all that, and
hate to think about the two of us.
I'm about to make you a hero.
There seems no justice or the true love.
I deserve whatever I'm gonna get.
I guess right now I should just give it up.
The truth is what we need.
'Cause I do believe it's gone on long enough. Yeah.
And the truth is what everybody else needed to hear.
This will be the last I'll speak of it. I've dragged it out, I'm aware of it. But you can't blame me for my bitterness. Bitterness. Bitterness.
911, what's the emergency, please?
From her home on Cresswell Circle in Bella Vista, Arkansas, 43-year-old mother of three, Kathy Lynn Torres called 911 at 11:33 p.m. on the 29th of March in 2015. The emergency? Her 6-year-old son, Mauricio Isaiah Torres, was not breathing. EMP medics from the Bella Vista Fire Department arrived on the scene in 7 minutes to find young Isaiah lying on his back on the living room floor. He was unresponsive and he still wasn't breathing. The first responders urgently prepared to rush the poor boy to Mercy Hospital in Bella Vista. But prior to leaving the Torres residence, they discovered multiple lacerations and severe bruising on the 6-year-old child. They immediately requested for the Bella Vista PD to be notified. It was clear from that point that what Isaiah was going through was no accident. He was a victim. As many of you know, I, like Isaiah, am from Arkansas. This case will probably be one of the most personal cases I'll ever cover. You see, I was the victim of child abuse at the hands of a babysitter when I was about 2. As a matter of fact, if my mother hadn't have had a gut feeling that I might be in danger, there's no telling how far the abuse might have escalated. I was lucky to have my mother, but not all children get so lucky. I'm MrBlack, and this is the disturbing truth of a mother and her monster, the story of Isaiah Torres. Just before midnight on the 29th of March, 2015, Officer Jeff Blake was called to the Torres residence at the request of the first responders. He arrived at 12 on the button, but the emergency vehicles were already leaving the scene. Dispatch redirected Officer Blake to the emergency room at Mercy Hospital. He was there in 7 minutes. When Isaiah Torres got to the hospital, Dr. Franklin Mayhew began desperately trying to revive the little boy and save his life. But sadly, it was too late, and 6-year-old Mauricio Isaiah Torres was pronounced dead at 12:23 a.m. on Sunday, March 30th, 2015. Officer Blake consulted firefighters Chuck Lawson and Captain Cottingham about what they witnessed when they arrived at the Torres residence at 11:40 p.m. Lawson said he could immediately see 45-year-old father, Moritzio Alejandro Torres, attempting to provide CPR to an unresponsive Isaiah Torres, who was laying lifeless on the living room floor. Standing nearby was the boy's mother, Kathy Torres, and Isaiah's 2 sisters aged 5 and 6. The 6-year-old little girl was Isaiah's twin. Lawson rushed in to provide emergency CPR to the little boy on the ground. He asked Cathy and Moritzio what happened. They stated that they'd just returned home from a camping trip and they had no clue what was wrong with their son. He had no medical history, nor were they aware of any condition that could have caused Isaiah to collapse like that. At this point, 2 other firefighters brought in a cot and loaded the 6-year-old boy onto it. This is when Lawson noticed that Isaiah had multiple bruises and cuts on his body. As he turned the child on his side, he observed additional injuries. Heavy bruising and puncture wounds littered the small victim they carried. The firemen carried the child out of the house and put him in the ambulance where they continued to attempt to save his life. This is where they contacted the police to report suspected foul play and notify authorities of the injuries they found on the kid's body. Resuscitation was no use, and after 10 minutes, they were still unable to get any signs of life from Isaiah Torres, so the emergency vehicle left Creswell Circle and headed for the hospital. While in the treatment room at Mercy Hospital, Officer Blake visually inspected Isaiah's body, taking several photographs in the process. There were injuries all over the child, including cuts to his head, knees, and upper feet. Several wounds were observed on his back and massive bruising on the boy's side. This was the same heavy bruising the firefighters had observed in the house. It was glaringly obvious that something sinister had happened. Officer Blake spoke with the doctor. Isaiah had never regained a pulse post-arrival to Mercy Hospital. The doctor also stated that the 6-year-old showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head, trunk, and other parts of his body, as well as superficial lacerations and bruises of an undetermined age. It was starting to look like Isaiah had been suffering from long-term abuse. As the doctor was going over the injuries on the little boy's body, a nurse informed Officer Blake that fresh blood had just been found in the child's rectum. Things were already dim surrounding the suspicious death of 6-year-old Isaiah Torres, but with this new revelation, the darkness had just dipped into pitch black. The doctor also told Officer Blake that he'd spoken to Isaiah's father, Moritzio Torres, and he claimed that the injuries on Isaiah's back were caused by chemical burns the young boy sustained in the past. Mr. Torres stated that his son had been treated for these at Arkansas Children's Hospital in Little Rock. The doctor checked the records, and he confirmed that Isaiah had indeed been treated for some kind of injury the year prior in 2014. But I'll be damned if the past didn't start looking hair-raisingly sus at that moment. Officer Green remained with the Torres family until they were escorted to Bella Vista Police Department for further questioning. Kathy Torres rode in the back seat of Green's cop car, while Moritzio and the 2 little girls followed behind in the family vehicle. Once at the station, the husband and wife were kept separate. Kathy Torres was interviewed by BVP Detective Ed Williams that Monday morning on March 30th of 2015. She claimed the family got home from their camping trip in Hollister, Missouri on Sunday night at around 10 p.m. Earlier that day at 2 p.m., she claims Isaiah had been complaining about a stomachache. She said she gave him some Pepto-Bismol and was under the impression that he was feeling better. She even said the 6-year-old fell asleep on the way home, only waking up when the journey was over. After that, the mother claims Isaiah helped the family unpack the car and had no trouble walking into the house on his own. Kathy said she thought the 6-year-old was fine. Tired, but fine. She said he even took a shower on his own before putting on his Spider-Man pajamas. But around this time, the young boy started complaining that his stomach was hurting again, so Kathy made him some green tea before he laid down in the master bedroom and fell asleep. Miss Torres stated that she left the room when the child began to snore. But when she came back, Isaiah was no longer breathing. She told the detective that she tried shaking him awake, but her son was unresponsive, so she called 911. While Kathy denied knowing anything about the bruising on her son's body, she did admit to noticing dark rings around his eyes when the family arrived home on Sunday night. But her excuse was that
Isaiah runs into doorknobs all the time.
When questioned about the bruises and marks on his body, and asked how she possibly could have missed these horrific injuries, Miss Torres said she never sees her 6-year-old son without his shirt on. But Detective Williams wasn't buying that shit. He told her outright that it looked like Isaiah Torres was being abused. She denied causing injuries on the child's body, but when asked if Mr. Torres may have caused them, she stated,
I didn't do it. Let's say that.
Williams also told Cathy that it appeared as if the 6-year-old's nose had been broken, but she claimed Isaiah's nose had always been a little crooked. Now, I've seen pictures of this cute, innocent little boy. I've yet to see a crooked nose. Before the first interview with Kathy Torres concluded, she claimed that she rarely spanked the kids and that it had been months since she'd done so. In her closing statement, she claimed Moritzio was a loving father and that the couple seldom ever even fought or argued. Then with that, the interview was over. Next, Detective Williams began interviewing Mr. Torres. He confirmed that the family had just returned from a camping trip in Missouri. But according to him, Isaiah not only had a stomachache, but he had diarrhea, and he was vomiting. The dad claims he and Cathy gave their son some Pepto-Bismol and plenty of water to make sure the child stayed hydrated. Mr. Torres said that Isaiah did indeed sleep on the journey back home, but he claims it was hard to wake him up when they finally arrived. After that, he said Cathy helped Isaiah bathe in order to get the smoke smell from the campfire off his body. It was apparent at this stage that one or both of the adult members in the Torres family were hiding something ominous. After Isaiah was cleaned up, his parents put him in the master bedroom because he was sick and they thought he would sleep it off. They claimed they thought everything would be okay. But Isaiah Torres died, and he ended up on the disturbing truth. So as you probably guessed, nothing was okay, and everything was fucked.
The disturbing truth will continue in a moment.
I take my true crime documentaries very seriously, and I spend countless hours researching every nook and cranny, gathering all the information I need to make videos like the one you're watching right now. But due to the region I live in, I often find that some of the sources I need to access for research are blocked, but thankfully I can get around this with a VPN. And that's one of the many reasons why I'm excited to introduce you to today's sponsor, Surfshark. It's the only shark that will keep you safe while surfing. Surfshark is a VPN, or virtual private network, with over 3,200 servers in 65 countries. But what is a VPN and why do you need one? Well, a VPN keeps you and your personal data safe and hidden from view whenever your device is online. It's kind of like blurring out your personal information, and it's done via something called encryption. This means no one can see the who, what, when, where, or why of your online activity. Think of the Surfshark VPN service as the equivalent to wearing pants when you leave the house, so your little bits are kept private. When you download the Surfshark app on almost any desktop computer or mobile device, you can surf the world from pretty much anywhere. For instance, I'm in Eastern Europe right now, and the EU Netflix catalog is missing a ton of titles that I'd love to watch. Before I got a VPN, I didn't even realize that Netflix USA has so much content that we don't get here. And that goes the other way too. But now that I signed up for Surfshark, I can stream almost anything. Oh, and on top of that, whenever I want to shop online for US prices and special offers not available in my location, I just click or tap a button and suddenly the internet thinks I'm in New York, but when the sun is shining, okay? I mean, this has been immensely helpful when buying plane tickets too. Or just last week I tried to log into my US bank account from my location, but the page wouldn't load, at all. As it turns out, my bank recently blocked this region from accessing their site due to fear of cyber attacks. But she bang, she bop, bop, Surfshark! And magically I'm in Canada, where Netflix is different again, so yay. Surfshark is the all-in-one VPN for your internet needs, from encryption on public Wi-Fi networks to shopping online and streaming region-blocked content from almost any site. And because you're a Disturbing Truth fan, Surfshark and I have teamed up to offer you a gnarly 83% discount off a 2-year membership right now. Plus, they'll throw in an extra 3 months for free on the house. It's the best price and value on the VPN market. When you sign up, if you're not happy in 30 days, let Surfshark know and you'll get your money back. It's that simple. It's Surfshark. Head on over to the link you see on your screen and in the description down below. Then enter the code DISTURBING to activate your savings now.
Welcome back to the Disturbing Truth.
Moritzio said he asked Cathy if they should take Isaiah to the hospital, but she said no. It's only a stomachache. Detective Williams confronted Mr. Torres about the numerous injuries found on the child's body, including a bruised diamond-shaped mark on the kid's abdomen. Moritzio said the black circles around Isaiah's eyes began to appear on Sunday as the boy got sick. He claimed he knew nothing about the bruises and stated, "You'll have to ask my wife about that." Then he put the rest of the injuries down to various falls, saying, "All I know is that he's clumsy." Well, ladies and gentlemen of the Disturbing Truth Unholy Tabernacle Choir, I say unto thee by the grace of God Almighty, I've never met a cognitively sound 6-year-old that was so clumsy. He'd need a helmet to keep himself from running into doorknobs and falling down. Mr. and Mrs. Torres, just what was your son falling onto? Your fists? Your feet? The floor? A 2x4? Spare me. The portrait here is painted in great detail, and I know a stroke when I see one. Detective Williams took a break from the interview, and when he returned, Moritzio was convinced that Cathy had cut a deal and planned to hang him out to dry for the death of Isaiah Torres. But the detective reassured Moritzio that he just wanted to know who exactly had been abusing the 6-year-old boy. Mr. Torres replied, "Don't ask me to betray my wife." He followed up by claiming he asked Cathy about the injuries all the time, but she'd just say Isaiah fell and that was that. But when Moritzio was shown photos of Isaiah's injuries, he said himself, they seemed to indicate neglect. He said child abuse is deliberate and that he and Cathy didn't do anything to the poor boy on purpose, or at least he hadn't, and he hadn't seen his wife do anything. But either way, he refused to betray her. The same morning Mr. and Mrs. Torres were interviewed at the police station, DHS transported Isaiah's 5-year-old younger sister and his 6-year-old twin sister to the Children's Advocacy Center in Little Rock, where forensic interviews were conducted, shedding more light on the darkness surrounding the death of their brother. During an interview with Aaron Craner, one of the sisters claimed that Isaiah had begun complaining about his stomach hurting Sunday morning, March 29th. Kathy Torres reportedly went to the store to get him some medicine. The sister remembered her brother sitting down a lot during the camping trip. She also recalled Isaiah falling asleep on the way home, but contrary to her parents' conflicting testimonies, she claims her brother had to be carried into the house. The little girl further states that her father, Mr. Torres, laid the boy on the bed, and Mrs. Torres, along with the 2 younger girls, undressed Isaiah before Moritzio carried him into the shower. She then describes how her brother was unable to stand on his own, and despite his father's efforts to hold him upright and bathe him, Isaiah fell in the shower. After the boy was cleaned up, the sisters fetched Isaiah's clothes before Mr. and Mrs. Torres gave their son some green tea and gummy vitamins. Oddly enough, the sister denied her parents used spanking as a form of punishment on the children. In an interview with the second sister, the story was reconfirmed, though she added that Isaiah sustained injuries to his face because he fell and claimed he busted his knees while climbing. She too said her father had to hold up the 6-year-old boy in the shower because her brother, as she described it, was still sleeping. That same day, BVPD officers executed a search warrant at number 9 Cresswell Circle, Bella Vista, Arkansas. What they found was soul-destroying. There was blood spatter on the walls, the ceiling, and the floors of both the master bedroom and master bathroom. There was also splatter found on 2 15-pound dumbbells in the master bathroom, right beside the bathtub. After that, they recovered a fire poker laying on the floor near the bed. It had a diamond-shaped handle. There was also vomit on the bed and a stethoscope nearby. It was time to find out what the hell happened to Isaiah Torres. The following day, on March 31st of 2015, Captain Tim Cook of the BVPD interviewed Kathy Torres again. She claimed she didn't know if her husband had done anything to Isaiah or not because she went to Lowe's for 45 minutes on Sunday the 29th of March at around 2:30 p.m. She also said that Moritzio had been with Isaiah for an extended period of time in her absence on Friday the 27th of March from around 4:30 p.m. Then Kathy let something slip in the interview. She said she'd seen her husband abuse Isaiah in the past with various objects ranging from a belt, extension cord, and even his knuckles to the boy's head. Mrs. Torres also admitted that these beatings would sometimes cause the child to bleed. According to Cathy, when Mr. Torres beat Isaiah with the belt, he would warn the 6-year-old that if he cried, he would hit him more, because he wanted Isaiah, a little helpless, innocent boy, to learn to be a man. Something Moritzio Torres obviously never figured out as he grew into monsterhood. While Kathy Torres admitted to using neosporin to treat the cuts that resulted from the beatings, she also admitted that she too used to whip Isaiah with the belt. but she denied hitting him with enough force to cause injuries, visible ones anyway. Cathy was released pending further investigation, but not for long. Captain Cook called her in for a third interview on April 1st of 2015. This time during questioning, she stated that she was scared of her husband. She said she knew she shouldn't have let her fear take control of her life. And by her own admission, Kathy Torres knew better. According to her at the time, based on the information she was giving in this interview, her 6-year-old son was no longer living because she did nothing to stop her husband from hurting him. As a matter of fact, she joined in, out of fear and all. An autopsy of Isaiah Torres indicated that a hard, foreign object had been forced into the boy's rectum, causing a severe cut in the lining of that region. It was a clear indication of sexual assault. Mrs. Torres denied knowing anything about it. She said the first time she saw Moritzio hit Isaiah in a way that one might consider abusive was only in January. According to Cathy, whenever Mr. Torres would come home from work, the girls would tattle on their brother. This would irritate Moritzio Torres, who would then gather everyone in the bedroom for a meeting. He would remind them all of the rules before sending Cathy and the 2 girls out of the room so he could abuse Isaiah. She recalled once witnessing Isaiah being whipped to the ground with an extension cord. Once the child fell, Moritzio continued to strike him on the back. He hit him roughly 10 times. Mrs. Torres described the extension cord and demonstrated a simulation of the beating for Captain Cook during the interview. She also informed him that this was one of those instances where the abuse drew blood. Moritzio then instructed his son to take a shower and put some neosporin on his injuries. She went on to describe in detail another time that Isaiah's father drew blood, then another, and then more. Mom stood by and watched. Mother did nothing to stop her monster. She did nothing as her bleeding child was offered no more than a shower and some cream to aid his wounds. Injuries inflicted by his own father, a man Cathy claimed was loving in the first interview. On April 3rd, BVPD officers and officers from Bentonville Police Department conducted a search of a Captiva camper trailer owned by the Torres family. It's believed that this vehicle was the same one the family went to Hollister, Missouri in during the previous weekend. During the search, investigators found a large circular area of blood on one of the mattresses. It had been flipped over in order to conceal the stain. As the search continued, blood splatter was found in numerous places in the camper. All of it was photographed, and swabs were sent to be analyzed by the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory. On the 31st of March, Dr. Stephen Erickson of the Arkansas State Medical Examiner's Office conducted an autopsy on the body of Isaiah Torres. On April 6th, Dr. Erickson revealed his findings to authorities via a conference call. In summary, he stated that the manner of the little boy's death was homicide. The preliminary cause of death resulted in a hard object being inserted into his rectum within 24 hours of the little boy's passing. The doctor also observed multiple healed, and acute blunt force trauma injuries to Isaiah's head, trunk, and other extremities. He remarked that the 6-year-old boy had suffered significant abusive injuries. His death was in the spectrum of chronic child abuse syndrome. In conclusion, the affidavit states, Maurice Isaiah Torres died as a result of chronic child abuse, with the final act of anal and rectal trauma occurring while he was in the exclusive care of his parents. During another recorded interview with Mr. Torres on April 7th of 2015, Moritzio finally revealed the horror of what really happened in the lead-up to Isaiah's death. It's one of the sickest things I've ever heard a parent do to their kids in the name of punishment. While on the camping trip, Isaiah apparently ate some cake that he wasn't supposed to. When Moritzio saw the boy covered in cake, he was pissed. Mr. Torres revealed that his initial form of discipline was to spank the 6-year-old boy and make him do exercises. But because he felt the punishment wasn't working, he forced a stick into the boy's rectum and made him stand in a corner and do squats. Moritzio furthered that it wasn't the only time he'd done this to his son. But Kathy Torres was there too, and not only did she do nothing, But according to Moritzio, she complained that the 6-year-old boy wasn't doing the squats fast enough, so she went over and forced him down onto the stick. This would result in creating the injury that led to a bacterial infection. This killed him. They murdered him. Torres showed Captain Tim Cook of the BVPD how Isaiah was doing the squats. When Mr. Torres was asked about the cake and what exactly Isaiah was doing with it, Moritzio said the boy was eating it. Then he had the nerve to laugh, stating he was only laughing because Isaiah was so cute. How could anyone laugh at anything after confessing that? The cop informed Moritzio that what he did was murder. Moritzio said Cathy was equally responsible, and that's probably the only time I'll ever agree with that son of a bitch. Mr. Torres claimed that his wife and daughters would also hit Isaiah, but if he was around, he would try and stop it. When asked how Isaiah sustained the injuries to his head, Moritzio claimed the boy shaved his scalp. I call bullshit. Captain Cook saw the autopsy photos of the boy's head and said they were the hardest photos he's ever had to look at. These wounds weren't self-inflicted, in my opinion. We're talking about a dad who enjoyed hurting this little boy. He and his wife enjoyed inflicting pain on their son. The state served up a warrant for Moritzio Alejandro Torres, charging him with the following crimes: capital murder, battery in the first degree, and finally, rape. Cathy was also arrested and charged. Mrs. Torres testified that she hadn't caused any of her son's injuries. When shown the autopsy photos, she claimed she wasn't aware of the damage that had been inflicted on poor Isaiah. Nevertheless, she pleaded guilty to her charges and is currently serving life in prison. She's never eligible for parole. She says she took a plea deal because the death penalty is suicide and, well, suicide is wrong. Wow, that's very Jesus of her. Prosecutors were seeking the death penalty for Moritzio, and in 2016, he was convicted for the murder of his son, 6-year-old Isaiah Torres. The jury also recommended the death penalty.
Wow, Hamburglar has a magic kit.
Magic! Rebel, cadabra!
I should have known you'd have something like that up your sleeve.
We have not actually executed anyone since 2005.
But the Benton County prosecutors are hoping Mauricio and Kathy Torres will be convicted and executed for the murder of their 6-year-old son. Our legal expert, Brian Galini, says the prosecution has a very strong case against the Torreses.
When the death penalty is on the table, some people want to know, why are we spending all the time and money on a trial? But in our state, a trial is required when the prosecution seeks the death penalty, even if the factual evidence is overwhelming.
Although he says there's overwhelming evidence, Arkansas state law requires a trial.
The only reason we would take any of that off the table is if the family did not support a trial because they didn't want to walk through the challenges of actually reliving the experience, and then secondarily the prosecution agreed to support the family's decision to not seek the death penalty.
Galini says the sentencing phase will be the most interesting, and after the murder trial for both Mauricio and Cathy, the feds could take up the case too for the rape that allegedly occurred before Isaiah died from chronic abuse.
The charging document lists the rape of a child, alleges the rape of a child taking place in Missouri, but of course the defendant crossed state lines to do that, which implicates federal jurisdiction.
The same jury to convict will also be the one to recommend the death penalty.
The prosecution can request a death-certified jury, meaning that all members who serve on the jury have said during the juror screening process that they, if asked, could execute the defendant.
That has been challenged before, but years ago the Supreme Court said that procedure is constitutional.
Isaiah's now 9 and 12-year-old sisters took the stand during the trial and described how their father used to force Isaiah to sleep naked in a cage or a trash can almost every night. The 12-year-old sister claimed the mother and father treated Isaiah differently than she treated the other kids.
It was a day full of tears inside the courtroom as Isaiah's now 9-year-old sister took the witness stand telling stories of abuse after abuse. But the most emotion the jury showed was when she testified that Isaiah would often be forced to sleep in a cage. Most nights he slept naked. This, she said, was to prevent him from getting food. A photo of the cage was taken in as evidence. Isaiah's sister told the jurors that there was one time where Isaiah was forced to stay in a trash can locked inside the bathroom. She said her, quote, old dad Mauricio hit Isaiah with cable cords and sticks often. During the camping trip where prosecutors say Mauricio raped and killed Isaiah, his sister told the jury she saw him in the bathroom with his arms and legs tied together with shoelaces. She says she saw some of what happened when prosecutors say Isaiah was sodomized by his father. She said Mauricio also told her at one point, quote, don't tell anyone what happened, end quote. The jury then heard from the medical examiner who conducted Isaiah's autopsy. He says Isaiah was chronically abused, noticing close to 100 injuries on his head and back alone. He said he had teeth knocked out, nose broken too. It was an emotional and tough day for many people inside the courtroom today. The jurors were shown pictures of Isaiah in the medical examiner's office. One juror asked for a box of tissues. Another juror cried uncontrollably. One juror kept wiping away her tears. In Bentonville, UNLE 4029 News.
During his trial, Moritzio Torres had the nerve to say, and I quote, "If I would have taken my son to the doctor, he would be alive. I've had to live with that for the last 5 years. The best part of being a father is your blood runs in their veins. When my son died, a piece of me died." Well, to that I say, not a big enough piece. Here's a stick, Moritzio. Do something with that. Throughout the 2016 trial, the court also heard testimony from 5 of Mauritzio's children, including 3 older stepsons.
This is Isaiah Torres, born to Mauricio and Kathy Torres. At the time of his death, he was 6 years old. According to the probable cause report, Isaiah's death was a result of internal injuries caused by rape and abuse. In the report, police said Isaiah had, quote, heavy bruising and cuts all over his body, including his head, knees, and feet. The Torreses told police their family had returned from a camping trip in Missouri, and the boy was complaining of a stomachache and was weak. During the investigation, detectives said they found blood on a camper mattress and inside the couple's home on the walls and floor. Bella Vista police officers said the boy was taken to the emergency room March 29, 2015. Isaiah was pronounced dead at the hospital. Following an autopsy, the Arkansas medical examiner's officer ruled the death a homicide.
Before Mauricio and Cathy moved to Bella Vista, Arkansas, and had 3 children, each had children of their own. Mauricio was previously married to another woman, Linda. They married in California and had 2 kids, Erica and Torres. Cathy had 3 boys and 1 girl before meeting Mauricio. They're Nicholas, Quentin, Spencer, and Bailey. After they got married, they had 1 boy and 1 girl. They lived in Jonesboro, Arkansas, before moving to Bella Vista.
Erica and Torres lost contact with their biological dad after Mauricio met and married Cathy.
The last we heard was, that they got the parental rights taken away, and I thought, good, it's done, like that was our, justice, And then to hear that here he is.
With 3 more kids.
Yeah, and I was scared. I was afraid to know, what happened to them. My brother called me on the phone, I was shaking.
Torres had called Erica and told her Mauricio was charged with raping and murdering Isaiah Torres. Instantly, Isaiah and Torres had one connection. Both of their first names are Maurice, named for their biological father.
The reason why I named you after me is because you're going to hurt people just like I did. You'll be a monster just like I am.
Was it always about him?
Yes, he was very self-centered. Extremely. He had to eat first. He always came first. His needs came before ours,
Yeah, we'd get in trouble as soon as he walked in the door, if we didn't come up and give him hugs and kisses and stuff,
So he still made you give hugs and kisses?
Oh yeah, we had to treat him like Father of the Year.
Yeah.
We couldn't show that we were scared of him.
Erica and Torres say despite the torment, they did learn to love from their mother.
He would even get mad because our mom would try to protect us, or loved us. He hated all of that. He didn't want us to be close. Our relief was our mom.
Yeah, definitely.
She tried to keep us and protect us, and as bad as the things that we went through, she still tried to teach us love and unconditional love, and that.
Because your mom was also abused, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Both siblings even protected one another from one dark secret. They were both raped by Mauricio on a regular basis.
We didn't want the other one to be hurt. My brother called me one day and he asked me, and he's crying on the phone. He goes, look, I'm old enough now. Please tell me the truth. Did the things that happened to Isaiah, did he ever hurt you? That's when I told my brother. My brother never knew until all this happened.
They both agree the worst form of punishment came when they were both forced to fight one another until they bled.
When this would happen, I would tell my brother, I'd tell him, I'm sorry. I'd tell him I'm sorry, and I don't want to hurt you. To tell him, please scream louder so this happened. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, do what you gotta do.
And finally, they're speaking out.
This is all really, really hard for me. To tell our story and have people listen, and because when you read about this and you hear about it, it's like, how can this be real? How can this really happen? And I felt so bad. I felt like I failed all my brothers and sisters.
He was also accused of performing other horrific acts on Isaiah, including beating him with objects, bathing him in bleach, and ripping his teeth out with pliers. What a cunt. Moritzio Torres was found guilty and sentenced to death for the murder of Isaiah Torres.
Mauricio Torres will be put to death by lethal injection exactly 1 year from today, but there is an appeals process that they have to sort through. That execution date will likely be stayed and it will be put off to another date. This is according to his defense attorney. There'll be an appeal filed and his current defense attorney will write the brief. When that happens, an automatic stay will be set for the execution date. Right now, he's at the Benton County Jail waiting to be transported, likely to death row. The judge will have to sign the papers and his transport will likely be this week. The prosecutor says this is justice.
Well, we're certainly gratified today by the jury's verdict. I think it is justice for what was a horrific crime, the murder of Isaiah Torres. Not only that, but the chronic abuse both of Isaiah and five of his siblings.
The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. In Bentonville, Una Lee, 4029 News.
Both parents of Isaiah Torres will now be paying for their son's death. Kathy Torres will spend the rest of her life in prison after she pleaded guilty this week. Mauricio Torres is on death row. Today, for the first time, we're hearing what Mauricio Torres told police after Isaiah's death. 4029's Una Lee has this story.
I deserve whatever I'm going to get.
For the first time, we are hearing clips from one of the 3 interviews police conducted with Mauricio Torres. In the final interview, Mauricio confesses to the crime.
I'm a criminal and a monster and all that, and especially, but I'm about to make you a hero. This Bella Vista and all that, because he's going to solve this case for you.
He admits Isaiah was sodomized during a family camping trip. Mauricio also admits it was not the first time.
When you said that you did it once before,
no,
put the stick.
I did that one before. I tell you.
How long before this last Sunday was that?
A while. It was. Normally I was spanking.
A forensic pathologist says Isaiah died when his rectum was torn, and chronic abuse for years contributed to his death. Mauricio says Cathy is equally guilty.
The reason why she's not saying anything, because she doesn't want to implement herself. Does that make sense? Because she knows she's equally guilty.
Captain Tim Cook is a leading investigator.
The truth is what we need, and the truth is what...
It's going to give me the needle, but...
No. The truth is what everybody else needed to hear.
And we spoke with Captain Cook soon after Kathy pleaded guilty to the crime.
The perpetrators were the parents, the ones that are supposed to defend and take care of that child. Nobody wants to investigate this case. But again, we have a job to do as law enforcement. And again, I'm very happy with the outcome that we have.
Mauricio's execution date has not been set, and Kathy will not be eligible for parole.
And just when you think justice did something right, it clubs you in the ear with the palm of its hand. Unfortunately, in 2019, the Arkansas Supreme Court overturned Moritzio's conviction, stating that rape couldn't be used to substantiate a capital murder conviction. The defense of Mr. Torres argued that there was no way he could have known his son was going to die, and they recommended a charge of manslaughter. That's a little too light if you ask me. How about sexual boy slaughter? Can we kill him then?
Continuing our coverage on the retrial of a man previously convicted of sodomizing and killing his 6-year-old son. Opening statement officially starting today. Mauricio Torres was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death back in 2016. But the state Supreme Court overturned that conviction, ruling the state did not prove its case for the death penalty. KNWA's Kelly O'Neill joins us live now from Bentonville. And Kelly, you've been in the courtroom all day. What happened today?
Jennifer, opening statements began at 1:30 this afternoon. Also, 3 witnesses took the stand. 2 of them were Isaiah Torres' kindergarten teachers. The other was an EMT that performed CPR on Isaiah Torres the day that he died. Mauricio Torres showed no emotion this afternoon, and when prosecutors were showing him photos of his son, he looked away. Both the defense and the prosecution agreed that Isaiah Torres died after the contents of a puncture wound to his rectum emptied into his stomach. Prosecutor Nathan Smith argued that Isaiah suffered from chronic child abuse syndrome and that both of his parents failed him by being physically abusive for at least 2 years. Defense attorney Bill James didn't argue the abuse, but told jurors they need to ask themselves this question: did his conduct show that Torres was aware Isaiah would die? The defense team also argued that his wife, Kathy Torres, was responsible for most of the physical abuse. Several other witnesses expected to take the stand. That includes 2 doctors, one from the Arkansas State Crime Lab. The other is from the hospital where Isaiah Torres died. Another person who will be taking the stand is a Bella Vista police detective who ran the investigation, Kathy Torres, also Isaiah Torres' 12-year-old sister. And finally, Mauricio Torres himself is expected to take the stand within the next few days. Court is going to resume here in Bentonville tomorrow.
The second trial was scheduled and took place around March of 2020, but nothing changed. The jury found Moritzio Torres guilty of murder and battery again. During the sentencing, they brought a man into the court to testify. That man was 24-year-old Quentin Martin. He was in jail at the time in Benton County for meth possession charges. He'd been in and out of jail for a number of things since he was 20, as far as I can see. Everything from breaking and entering to first-degree battery of an inmate. In that instance, the other inmate ended up with a fractured skull, bleeding in his brain, and a neck fracture. Quentin Martin was clearly a very angry and aggressive individual. And why wouldn't he be? His stepdad was Moritzio Torres. His mother was Kathy Martin, a.k.a. Kathy Torres. While on the stand, shackled and in a correctional uniform, Quentin Martin was asked if Moritzio Torres had ever sexually assaulted him. Without answering the question, Martin jumped up and lunged for Mr. Torres. And so help me God, I wish Quentin would have got a hold of him, but unfortunately, he didn't. The courtroom evacuated as the bailiffs assumed control of the situation. No one was harmed, but the defense took the opportunity to ask for a mistrial, and the stupid fucking judge agreed.
A crime alert tonight, a mistrial granted in a Northwest Arkansas murder trial. Earlier today, during the sentencing hearing, officials say Quentin Martin jumped from the witness stand and tried to attack Mauricio Torres. Torres is Martin's stepfather, and yesterday a jury convicted Torres of killing his 6-year-old son.
I think Mr. Martin was, he frankly was heartbroken about it. And look, you know, it's a hard thing for him, and I certainly cannot blame him for doing it.
You never know what's going to happen in a case like this. There's a lot of emotions, and this is the kind of thing you get when you try to put someone to...
The prosecution and defense will meet on March 19th to discuss options for moving forward.
A brand new trial would have to be held for Moritzio Torres. At the time of his arrest, Moritzio Torres worked as a Medicaid provider. He had 2 biological children named Maurice and Erica before he had Isaiah and his 2 sisters. Moritzio was someone who helped people, and Cathy, Isaiah, and her 2 daughters were known to work as volunteers in the Samaritan Community Center for over 3 years. But Cathy and Moritzio homeschooled these 3 children to avoid anyone ever finding out about what they were doing. And guess what one of Mauritzio's specialties was in his healthcare profession? Oh, you won't believe it. Adolescent and children's mental health. And the real kick to the heart is that in 04 or 05, while living in Jonesboro, Arkansas, Moritzio and Kathy Torres had all 5 of their previous children removed from their home by way of court order. DHS also investigated claims of maltreatment in 2014 against Isaiah's 2 sisters. Then an even earlier DHS investigation for the maltreatment of kids in the Torres family care emerged dating back to 2002. Moritzio was even investigated for allegations that he raped a 4-year-old girl in the early 2000s. It was Cathy's own daughter. Reports from the Jonesboro Police Department indicate that the local prosecutor's office declined to pursue some charges against Moritzio, even though a judge reportedly found enough evidence to terminate the parental rights in the case of 5 children in the early 2000s. But once those rights to the first 5 children in the Torres care were taken away, Moritzio and Cathy disappeared. None of their family ever knew where they went. They just vanished after their kids were taken off them. And the rest of the family? Well, they were unaware of any other kids until Isaiah was murdered. How were Cathy and Moritzio allowed to be around children? My God, DHS and Jonesboro Police Department, why didn't you do your damn job? Or more than your job if needed be. The evidence was disastrously obvious.
Prior to Isaiah's death in March, DHS was called to investigate at least 2 times in 2014. DHS found both cases unsubstantiated. One of the reportees was from Ambassadors for Christ, where Isaiah and his 2 sisters attended school. School officials say Isaiah attended classes before he was pulled out and homeschooled after they reported him to DHS. They called DHS officials saying they were worried about Isaiah's life at home. The director told me, quote, "The Ambassadors for Christ Academy is grieving the loss of Isaiah, a precious little boy, as we feel certain the entire community is. During his time at the Academy, DHS was hotlined with our concerns." 2 of Isaiah's former teachers sat on this witness stand. Isaiah's former teacher, Perry Heffernan, was the first to take the stand. She said Isaiah loved to sing and would be excited, but she also testified that Isaiah would often be angry, steal school lunches, and cry at nap time. She also told the people in court that Isaiah would come to school severely bruised. She said she called DHS, but no one ever came to talk to her. Hannah Welchenbaugh was Isaiah's music teacher. She also spoke well of Isaiah. However, she testified that he would suck his thumb when he got in trouble and also reiterated stealing lunches.
The testimony in court was that the teachers had taken some pictures of bruises on Isaiah they were concerned about and did report that.
Under Arkansas law, certain people, including teachers, are mandated to notify the child abuse hotline if they suspect abuse. We know Isaiah went to school for 1 year but was pulled out to be homeschooled after those DHS reports. It hasn't been easy finding people who met and knew Isaiah, but Isaiah did volunteer once or twice a month at the Samaritan Community Center. This document shows DHS conducted 2 prior investigations involving Isaiah. Both allegations of abuse, cuts, bruises, welts, turned up unsubstantiated. 1 year later, Isaiah died. The medical examiner who took Isaiah's case says Isaiah was chronically abused for more than 2 years, and the chronic abuse contributed to his death.
DHS was also involved with Mauricio's other children and stepchildren, including Nicholas and Quentin Martin. They were both in jail when they testified against Mauricio. During their testimonies, we learned of DHS reports dating back to 2002.
Kathy's biological son, Nicholas Martin, is now 22 years old. In court, he testified he was physically abused by Mauricio on a daily basis. When asked if he was interviewed by DHS, he replied, quote, "Yes, plenty of times, and they're photos from school," end quote. Nicholas was eventually adopted, just like his younger brother, Quentin. And we spoke with 21-year-old Quentin Martin months before the trial.
Mauricio made us tell them that we was always fighting all the time, so we had the bruises.
And this is Mauricio Torres, the man who's accused of murdering his son?
Correct, ma'am.
On the witness stand, Quentin testified that Mauricio, quote, used to make us fight each other, and that Mauricio would make him perform sexual acts with his own brother Nicholas while Mauricio watched.
Kathy's biological daughter, Bailey, was a toddler when she lived with Mauricio. She's 17 years old now, and she was adopted by her biological father and his wife. She told the jury, quote, "I was sexually abused by Mauricio Torres in that house," end quote. She said he, quote, "put his lips to my vagina," end quote, and forced her to watch pornography. These are the documents that show police in Jonesboro investigated 2 reports of rape of a 4-year-old girl in the case of Mauricio Torres. The girl in the case is Bailey. The 2004 police report shows Mauricio denied ever doing anything wrong, and when asked to take a polygraph, he said that he was advised by his lawyer not to take one. Torres was never charged due to lack of evidence. The police reports and DHS reports were brought up in this courtroom. They date back to 2002 to 2004. The number of open cases against Mauricio and Cathy are staggering. The defense pointed out that in the reports, both Nicholas and Quentin said their injuries were from soccer or football or sheer clumsiness.
And I think it's important to note the defendant told all of his kids to lie about what happened to them.
There were at least 8 investigations opened by the DHS involving Quentin alone. When I dug deeper, I found DHS's report card for 2013-14 produced by Horby Zeller Associates. It states the average caseload for Benton County is 41 cases per worker. This is far above the standard of 15 cases per worker set by the Child Welfare League of America.
There's always going to be things that different agencies can look back on and determine they should have done differently. But I do think it's important to fix blame where it should be. And the blame for what happened to Isaiah Torres is on the defendant in this case.
6 children were adopted by other families. Cathy and Mauricio lost contact with their family and had 3 more kids, Madison, Isaiah, and Mackenzie. Nicholas, Quentin, and Bailey sat here on the witness stand to testify against Mauricio. Bailey glanced at Mauricio at times, but both Nicholas and Quentin stared at Mauricio. The brothers were visibly upset. The judge even had to ask Nicholas to calm down, but the prosecutor says it was their chance to tell the truth.
Moritzio used to lock his kids in a room and make them fight each other. Reportedly, if they didn't hit each other, well, he'd hit them. One of the brothers even states that he used to make a couple of them perform sex acts on one another for his own sick amusement. And regularly, he'd beat them with sticks and sometimes wire coat hangers. If they cried, he'd deliver another 3 licks until they stopped crying. What a sick bastard. And allegedly, he performed oral sex on his 4-year-old stepdaughter on 2 separate occasions. And the kids were so scared they didn't tell anyone what was going on. Due to Mauritzio's threats, they were scared for their lives. This man is a monster in human skin, and a cowardly one at that, who hunts children and makes them suffer for his own pleasure. 52-year-old Moritzio Torres was due to stand trial for a 3rd time on January 31st of 2022. But the defense requested a motion for the trial to be rescheduled, and seeing as the date has passed, I'm guessing that's what happened. When will Isaiah Torres and the rest of the people that were harmed by this man finally get their vengeance? When will justice be injected into this guy's veins? And so the story is unfinished, with most of the world, I'm sure, waiting to find out that Moritzio Torres will still be sentenced to death, or at very least, spend the rest of his miserable, worthless life behind bars in constant fear for his safety. I mean, the second trial, from what I've read, was complete. Sure, Quentin Martin tried to attack Mr. Torres during the sentencing, but who on earth can blame him? I'd hazard a guess that Quentin's anger and aggression comes from the punishment he endured at the hands of his stepdad. Quentin didn't even get to put hands on him. Where's the mistrial? This just cost the state more fucking money for no reason. I usually take this time to rain my thoughts and feelings of condemnation down upon the heads of these monsters. And it's tempting, and it's downright satisfying at times. When I deal with cases like this, I don't want to be silent. I'm not virtue signaling. I'm not being a tough guy. And I'm not just as bad as the monsters I condemn. It's therapeutic to call these monsters out for what they are after researching in depth what they've done. Some people say the evil is a sickness and these people need help. Some say I shouldn't call them monsters. They should be treated like humans, albeit damaged humans, a person nonetheless. Berating them is immature, and it ruins your productions along with all the F-bombs you drop. Well, listen up, kitten. I hear you. I just don't care to listen. And apparently you've got something I'm not willing to give. A fuck. See, maybe Moritzio Torres was abused when he was a kid. And maybe that's where he learned it from. But I've just got this theory. It goes like this. In order to create a monster, you have to kill that innocent child first. Now, not every kid that's been abused grows up to become evil, but those who do didn't survive the abuse. That's why there's no cure for these sexual sadists. Dr. Mark Benecki pretty much touched on that in the last video during the interview. Remember when he said you can't change someone's sexual fantasies past a certain point? Those children died when their innocence and love was stripped from them, and their hearts were replaced with a void of fear and hate. In the place of that innocent child, a monster was born. Every count of abuse, and every day that child went without help and rescue, is a day the monster further took over their lives, until the point when the child was dead. When you choose to see the child in an incurable monster, you're closing the barn door, but the horse is already away. The monster lives. Isaiah Torres never even got that far thanks to his mother and father. The 6-year-old boy's abuse was so bad that neither he or any potential monster survived the torture he was subjected to. There simply must be stronger punishments for child abuse. And if you're a person that fakes abuse of any kind for attention, you deserve the same punishment an abuser should have gotten. Because when you fake it, you destroy the credibility of all the victims of abuse with your stolen valor style sickening behavior. And that's where I stand. I won't be changing my mind. I think about all the children Moritzio Torres harmed, but the one that won't leave my mind the most is Quentin Martin. When his abuse occurred, he lived in my hometown of Jonesboro, Arkansas. He's angry. He's aggressive. He's violent. He's unpredictable. He's damaged. In a way, he's Isaiah Torres in an alternate dimension. He survived Moritzio Torres, but he doesn't have to be a monster. And so far, he's led a very troubled life in and out of jail. None of this is his fault. I hope he finds light cast on his path, and he follows it out of the darkness before it's too late. Quentin, if you're listening, you could save 1,000 Isaiahs with your story, but you have to choose to get help and not let your past win. You must decide to heal, even though you can never forget. Violence must not consume you. Every single person on this channel is rooting for you and your family. Quentin's older brother, Nick Martin, who also suffered abuse at the hands of Torres and is recovering from his own life struggles, states in a message to his brother, "I love you. I know you looked up to me, and I didn't set the best example, but I want you to follow the example I'm setting now. I encourage it. If you're struggling trying to cope with past trauma and abuse, if you don't know where to turn, I hope the words of someone who's been through what you've been through has helped spark a revolution inside of you. Either way, it's not your fault. You don't deserve it. And whoever you are, you're far from alone. As victims, let's stand together and take our lives back. Abuse does not define us. I'm Mr. Black, and this is The Disturbing Truth.